acknowledging our weariness, naming it out loud, and that being the first step to moving forward. We know that our friends in AA and other groups like it teach us that one of the first steps to healing is to name the problem, is to name that there is a struggle. And so I acknowledge that there are many things that we bring into the season. And so hopefully as we journey through Luke, you'll see yourself, whether it's joy or grief, in the characters of the Christmas story. And so Luke 1, since many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, as one having a grasp of everything from the start, to write a well-ordered account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you might have a firm grasp of the words in which you have been instructed. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was descended from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. But they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. Once, when he was serving as priest before God during his section's turn of duty, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to enter the sanctuary of the Lord to offer incense. Now at the time of the incense offering, the whole assembly of the people was praying outside. Then there appeared to him an angel of the Lord, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was terrified, and fear overwhelmed him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He must never drink wine or strong drink. Even before his birth, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit. He will turn many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. With the spirit and power of Elijah, he will go before him to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." And Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I know that this will happen? For I am an old man, and my wife is getting on in years." The angel replied, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring this good news. But now, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time, you will become mute, unable to speak until the day these things occur." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering at his delay in the sanctuary. When he did come out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the sanctuary. He kept motioning to them and remained unable to speak. When his time of service was ended, he returned to his home. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And so I have entitled this sermon, "Hope That Is Born in the Silence." And I want to start off by talking about weariness. As I was preparing for this series, we are synced up with a number of churches and worshiping communities that are using the same theme. And so there's a Facebook group where people share ideas and talk about what the theme of the season means to them. And so one of the questions this week was, what is weariness? And I thought it was really profound, so I'm just going to start by reading some of those to you. Being tired is like knowing that a nap or going to bed will help you be less tired. Being weary, though, is like being uncertain of when the tiredness will end. Being weary is a daily grind whose end is not in sight. Being tired is when your body says, give me a break, nap, recovery time, while being weary is when your heart and mind say, please stop, no more piling on of woes and troubles, my soul is depleted. Being tired is, I need a nap, and being weary is, no amount of sleep can fix the way I'm feeling. Being tired is like not getting enough sleep. You yawn and get more coffee. Being weary is like explaining for the 85th time that you have no solution. Your soul aches and there is no coffee to soothe it. Being weary is like having our fuel and capacity stolen from us by bad news and dilemmas. And so those are just a few reflections on what weariness is like. Dear friends, as we delve into this narrative, I offer that this gospel of Luke, we find ourselves immersed in a context of weariness. Luke is a very beautiful and fascinating book. It is often hailed as one of the most universal gospels. Luke is a Gentile who is deeply interested in the roles of women, children, and social outcasts throughout the book, challenging societal norms and often placing marginalized people in the spotlight. It also places a profound level of importance on joy and good news, even in this context of weariness. This narrative that I just read unfolds against this backdrop of a tumultuous time in history, dominated by this looming figure called Herod the Great. He is known for his grand building projects, but also his legacy is tainted by his cruelty and paranoia, leading to the execution of many people, even people in his own family. And so as Luke carves out this universal tale, it becomes evident that the weariness that is experienced by Zechariah and those in his community is not just a personal weariness, it is one that is magnified by political turmoil and oppressive climate of the time. And so it is against this very harsh backdrop that we encounter Zechariah, a devoted priest offering prayers in the temple, offering his daily duties. His life and vocation are deeply committed to facilitating encounters with God for others. His life is dedicated to helping people encounter God. That's all that he does. And yet, the same Zechariah in our passage today, I wonder if you could imagine him bearing a heavy heart. In the midst of political chaos and his own personal struggle, his wife, Elizabeth, can't have kids. Zechariah's weariness wasn't just this abstract concept, it was a tangible reality that permeated his daily existence. After trying and trying to have children, they're both exhausted. And again, not the type of tired that I read to you a few moments ago, but the kind of bone tired. They've been praying for years for a miracle. They're both doubtful that their dreams would ever be fulfilled. Elizabeth would have carried the worst parts of the stigma of childlessness in a world where a woman's worth was deeply tied to her ability to bear children and raise a family. Imagine the societal pressure and the whispers about them maybe having sinned. That's a lot to carry. But again, even as we dig into Zechariah's personal weariness in his family, this story is not just about him and Elizabeth. It's about this universal weariness, a mix of personal struggles and societal collapse happening all around them. It's no wonder, then, that Zechariah has such a hard time receiving this word from an angel. and the arrival of good news. He's been let down so many times already. Disappointment has become his intimate friend. And yet it's like Luke is telling us that even in these messiest moments, divine revelation can sneak in and shock us. Now let's talk about Zechariah's silence. We are often quick to judge people like Zechariah for their feeble faith or their questions, their inability to receive a message. But like many people in the Bible, Zechariah too was experiencing weariness. Perhaps we might consider that Zechariah's silence was not just a punishment, it was an opportunity, maybe even a gift in disguise. The silence becomes a sacred space, inviting him to grapple with those doubts, unfulfilled dreams, and the turmoil that engulfs his people. You take a moment and you sit in that for just a second. It's not just the physical exhaustion of aging or the emotional strain of a childless marriage. It is a weariness of a nation oppressed, a people yearning for freedom, yearning for agency. It's an invitation, this silence, to name those personal and communal ailings. Through silence, Zechariah can no longer show up in the temple hiding from what is ailing him. He can no longer ignore what is troubling him. He has to sit in it, become acquainted with it, learn its contours, and get to the root of the problem he faces. The angel says, you sit in that for just a second. He can no longer pretend that everything is all right. Everything is laid bare in the silence, and the silence becomes a sacred classroom where Zechariah now has to learn how to listen, how to trust, how to await the fulfillment of God's promises. Within his silent season, Zechariah learns the transformative lesson that weariness is not a disqualification for divine revelation. The divine message breaks through the silence, not despite his weariness, but within it. The good news of a son arrives right in the midst of his doubts and struggles. The arrival of this good news is not dependent on his ability to recognize it. The good news comes anyway. His silence becomes the beginning of a new chapter, a moment where weariness and joy begin to dance together. And so in this moment, we discover this timeless truth. Good news still comes. Despite Zechariah's initial disbelief and the silence that followed, the promises of God are steadfast. The angel's words prove true, and Zechariah and Elizabeth experience the joy of a long-awaited son, John the Baptist, who would then lead the way for the Messiah. The first week of Advent invites us to embrace this profound truth for ourselves, that hope is born out of moments of weariness and despair. Rather than ignoring our struggles or forcing a facade of joy, we are called to recognize that good news can still find us. In fact, good news doesn't care if we can hold it or not. It just comes in anyway. The promises of God are not bound by the constraints of our weariness. Instead, they are unfolding in unexpected ways, breaking through the silence with the assurance of God. Zechariah's experience teaches us that weariness, rather than being a roadblock, can actually be a gateway to unexpected transformation. I'll give you a personal story. When I was really, really little, I once found myself sick with a really bad flu during Christmas. There was this misery of fever, chills, and extreme fatigue that overwhelmed my little tiny body, threatening to overshadow the joy of the season. And somehow, in the midst of this physical weariness, joy was still present. Christmas remained one of my favorite holidays, and I was able to cling to the moments of relief and laughter amidst my illness. Somehow, every few hours, I mustered up the strength for joy. Waking up to open a gift, savor a small snack, play with a new toy, or simply cuddle up with a blanket or with my mother. I vividly remember writing a letter to Santa that year, a plea for him to maybe help me feel better. Of course, Santa couldn't do that, but there was something magical about naming what was bothering me out loud, on paper, in whatever way I could. In writing that down, I was refusing to ignore how miserable I really was, how tired I was, how disappointed I was that my body couldn't keep up with the joy of the season. I was forced to sit with those feelings, understand them, put labels on them, explain them to someone, express them to someone. And in the silence, I was able to experience the season in a deeper, more profound way. In fact, that ended up being one of my most powerful memories about Christmas, being this small child with a horrible flu that we weren't sure that I would recover from. It was actually a time when my bond with my mother deepened significantly. She tirelessly stood by my side, attending to my every need, ensuring that even in the midst of bowls of hot soup and medicine and constant fluid intake, I could still relish the moments when I could be awake. Despite the challenging circumstances, she was determined that I would still experience some joy, even if it was a couple minutes at a time, and then going back to sleep. That year, my experience of the holidays turned into something more than just a joyful facade. I met God in the silence and misery. It was a lesson that naming our weariness can open the door to an even deeper experience of joy. In the midst of discomfort, I learned this profound lesson. Joy doesn't require our constant acknowledgement. In fact, this was a profound memory because it was the first time in my life that I learned that joy can coexist with misery, exhaustion, and weariness. The experience taught me that hope isn't contingent on my immediate awareness or acceptance. Good news, I discovered, has a way of finding us, even in spite of ourselves. It revealed to me that the purposes and plans of God persist despite the limitations of our understanding, of our emotions. And I don't know about you, but I'm so glad, so grateful that the promises of God are not dependent on me. Sometimes it's in our weariness, in the quiet places, that hope chooses to be born. As we enter this Advent season, it's important to recognize the weariness that takes on different forms. The hustle and bustle of the holiday season, while filled with moments of celebration, can magnify the burdens we carry. For some, the unmet expectations, unfulfilled dreams can cast a shadow, whether it's strained relationships, grief of loved ones, illness, housing insecurity, financial hardships, whatever it is. Christmas can be all kinds of things for people. Societal discord may also be another layer. How can we feel joy when we experience the gravity of war and oppression, the crushing of the vulnerable, a changing climate every day? The contrast between the world we want and the world we currently have. The tensions we witness globally can often cast a shadow, prompting us to grapple with the world we have and question our ability to bring about change. But the season prompts reflection on our hopes and desires, and for those in a season of waiting, weariness can become palpable, whether the desire for healing, reconciliation, or a sense of purpose. It may feel particularly high during this time. Yet, even in the heaviness, the light of hope persists, reminding us that the season of Advent is a testament to this enduring promise, this ridiculous promise that joy can emerge, often unexpectedly, despite us, even in moments of sorrow. This season encourages us to name our weariness, to bring it into the light without fear or hesitation. For in acknowledging our struggle, we create a sacred space for hope to do its work, to take root. Zechariah's story teaches us that even when circumstances seem bleak, even when we can't quite believe it, divine messages of hope can pierce through the silence. His story teaches us that sometimes the most profound moments of hope are born in silence, a silence that may not be broken until the appointed time. That good news comes when we least expect it. As we navigate the complexities of our stories, may we be attuned to the possibility that joy and good news can find us even in spite of ourselves, even in the moments where so much threatens to overshadow. So let us offer compassion, understanding to ourselves and to one another, knowing that joy and hope coexist with the struggles that we face. Amen. And so now we enter into a discussion, and we have the opportunity to share with one another what this message brought up in us, what might be bubbling to the surface, what questions may be emerging. So now is your time to share.
It's just so strange that this message was your message today, because I have definitely been feeling weary about praying for the war in Israel and Gaza and Afghanistan, and just continually praying for the people that are suffering, but to hear the words that the outcome is not up to me, and to know that there is joy already happening, just watching the hostages that have been released, and knowing that this season that joy has brought to those families, that they finally are reconciled and have their families home again. So just seeing that and understanding that God has his hand everywhere in that war, and that I don't have to be weary about praying, but I have to persevere and continue to pray and not feel weary about it, to just know that this is out of my hands, in the Lord's hands, and that hopefully someday we'll have that peace that we're praying for everywhere.
Thank you for that reflection. Any other thoughts? All right, thank you. Well, let us continue journeying through this service and through this season, knowing that even in spite of ourselves, a new thing is happening. We'll turn now to Anthony.